So I am really glad that we have a church where we take the arts seriously. We have a lot of gifted people in this church. There's many people who participate in all the various kinds of art. And we teach art at Brookfield Christian School, and the Christian schools typically teach it. So that's really cool. We do appreciate the arts here, and I love that. So we're going to interview Dawn Otten and my wife, Barbara Britton, and one of our worship leaders, John Pike. And so my first question for the panel is, tell us a little bit about your experience as an artist. What artistic endeavors sort of have you been involved with? How did you get into it? How did God reveal to you you had some gifts in that area? And then just tell us about maybe how you've been able to use, the arts have played a role in being salt and light. I'm going to start with Dawn.
Okay. When, on yet? Okay.
There we go.
When Rick asked me to be up here, I was thinking, I'm not really an artist. I'm a teacher, but I am a teacher, or I was a teacher. I'm retired now, but one who loved art. And even as a kid, I loved to draw. And then when I was older, I loved to paint. I was gifted a paint set, and I began to just learn how to paint, mostly on my own. And watched some Bob Ross from Public TV, the guy with the big afro with all the landscapes, and took some art classes. But I would say mostly I learned my art on my own, and it was basically through just doing it. And I think what really inspired me most, and you'll see from the paintings that I've done, they're mostly inspired by God's creation. So I have a true understanding and appreciation for the splendor of God's world. And so you'll see that in the paintings. I have landscapes and sunsets and flowers and animals, things like that. So that's kind of the history of how I've loved art. And then how did I use it? Well, in all three areas at home, I would decorate walls with artwork, and I'd bless my family with my grandkids have pictures on their walls. The church actually has some pictures here. I don't know if you realize that or not, but the nursery has 3 pictures in the infant nursery that I had painted, and this was a while ago, I had helped with some of the banners in front of church that had to do with Lenten and Easter and Pentecost. And then I would say I used most of my artistic things at school, because that was my life, teaching school. And so I would say in the classroom, certainly, they knew me as the teacher who loved art, and so I would have my students do art things to go along with lessons. I always felt like if they could visualize something, they could just understand the material better. Yeah. And they just loved it. And so they were activating a different part of their brain, which I think is always good. It makes you more of a whole person. At school, I also helped with, I designed a thing for our library, a big wall mural. And over time, I've done different artistic things in school. One thing that I loved, some people would say, why don't you be an art teacher? But I did love teaching my second graders, but I did follow up with that a little bit when, well, let's say our art program wasn't near as good as what it is now with Kara. I had said, well, let's do some kind of an art camp. And so that's what I did for about 5 years. I had kids sign up for art camp, and it was during the summer, and I tried to pick projects that I knew that they could do and be successful in and feel good about what they could accomplish at the end. So, that's kind of my history in
Excellent.
art.
I wish they had those art camps when I was a kid. Art was my favorite class.
I think there might even be some people here who've had them. They were so long ago.
Thanks, Dawn. Barb, tell us a little bit about your literary journey.
Well, I'm a writer of novels, and I write in the Christian fiction publishing world. So if you go into Barnes & Noble, 99% of those books are what we call mainstream, general market books. And then if you go back by the Bibles, you'll see the Christian fiction. And those are books that are written from a Christian worldview. And we have a few Christian guidelines. When you write Christian fiction, you're not going to have sex on the page or profanity or blasphemies in your novel. So we do have a set of rules that we write by, and you probably will have a character who has a faith journey, dealing with God, whether it's be finding God or recommitting their life, or they're going through a tough time and they come back to God. So I am published in Christian fiction. I write biblical fiction, historical fiction, and my latest is contemporary romance. And I never thought I would be an author. That was never given to me as an option, as a career. But I came into it through teaching. I was teaching chapel at Brookfield Christian, and I needed to get my lesson plans done. And I prayed, Lord, hit me with some creativity. And he did. I got my lesson plans done, and then I got a prompting to sit down and write a story that was in my head. And I actually wrote 3 books that were not what you would say Christian fiction. They were just general market books. My 4th one, I decided to write what I taught. I decided to write a story that was a takeoff of a Bible story. And that was the first book I got a contract for. And then I continued to write a series on little-known Bible characters. So I love to go in the Christian world. I entertain, educate, and encourage Christians, but I will step out of that world and go to just book events that are for everybody. And I will go specifically into the civic area, to school library events, to just libraries in general, and talk to them about Christian fiction. And my books, since they're available through Amazon, Barnes & Noble, can go where I can't. And so I have no idea who's reading my book in the world today. And hopefully they're shining a light on God and His Word.
And I've been to some of those book events with Barb. We go to a book event, for romance writers. There's a lot of different kinds of people there. And we always have interesting conversations when they come by and go, well, what do you write? What do you do? So it's a lot of fun. Thank you, Barb. John, tell us a little bit about your journey. We all know what you do here. You guys just do a wonderful job with the music here. But I want to also hear about your stuff outside the church. So tell us a little bit about your journey.
Well, I grew up in a musical family. My parents were both musicians. My mom was a piano teacher, so I took piano lessons, and just music was always part of our lives. My grandparents played music, and often we would play music for fun, just not performing necessarily, but playing when we would get together. My grandpa had an organ in his house. He was of that era where people would have an organ and a piano. And there was always a mandolin around, and trombones and guitars and things. My dad, so I played in bluegrass bands. My dad was into bluegrass and got us into bluegrass, and I played banjo primarily. And I've been in bands since I was in high school, and mostly local bands. And the band I'm in now is called Chicken Wire Empire, which is, I play the banjo, so you get the idea. But I've also then spent a lot of time teaching a lot of lessons as well. Kathy teaches lessons as well. I met Kathy playing bluegrass. We were in a bluegrass band together. But I spent a lot of time teaching, and one of the focuses of my teaching is teaching people how to jam together, how to play music together, and again, in that non-performance setting, where the goal is just to play music for the fun of playing music, and that doesn't happen very much in our society. Really the closest thing is church, where we're not performing, we're trying to sing communally. So I've spent a lot of effort in trying to make that the focus of my teaching, helping people get to that point where they're comfortable when they're not afraid to make mistakes, and that's kind of part of the fun, that idea.
Excellent, excellent. And I've been to a couple of those bluegrass jams, and it's phenomenal. I've got a few more questions, but you know what? Because we've only got 10 minutes, let me open it up. If someone has a question out there, we'll take a question from out there. Otherwise, I'll use one of my questions. Well, think about what question you might have, and let me ask this. There is a perception sometimes out there that a lot of Christian art is not quite up to snuff. I showed those pictures. Those are meant to be a little humorous. But what do you guys say about that? Do we need to up our game? And how do we get young people more interested in the arts?
Well, I've judged mainstream book contests. I've judged Christian book contests. And both of those have had excellent works of literature, and some of them, because I'm forced to read the whole thing, it's a slog to get through. So I would say it's in the mainstream market, it's in the Christian market. You have to put time in learning your craft, or your art is not going to be very good.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there's schlock everywhere. It's we don't have a market on that. And I may be in defense of the sort of cheesy stuff. I would say you kind of have to have that to have the good stuff. You know, when your second grader does a self-portrait, you put it on your refrigerator, not because you think it's great art, and not because you have no standards, but you realize that that's part of the process. And, you know, there's great, you know, if you look at any field of art, there's a lot of not so good stuff. You know, if you ask a songwriter, how do they write a great song? A lot of them will say, well, I wrote 20 horrible songs to get this one good one. Yeah. So in some ways, I think we can relax a little bit, and it just goes with the territory.
Yeah, excellent. Great answer. All right, Steve.
So, you know, I think one of the things art does is it explores a lot of different topics and kind of makes us think about different things. So one of the things I'm wondering about is you're exploring kind of an edgy theme. You know, certain, like, you know, art says you don't do sex, you don't do profanity in books. Is that ever okay?
So
can we explore themes of war without having violence and probably bad language and things like that?
Great question. So the ethics of art, what crosses the line, and how do you know where it is?
John, would you ever cover a song that uses bad language?
Yeah.
Like Whiskey Before Breakfast?
Yeah, it's an instrumental, so. Yeah, I think those are good. I think the important thing is to think about those things and be discerning and have those always at front of mind, and not just the morality issues, but is this true? I mean, in bluegrass, there's a ton of gospel music, which is part of the genre, but some of it's terrible theology. It's you know, I should not sing those songs. So there's that aspect, and then there's other things like, just again, to just use an example from bluegrass because it's what I know. There's murder ballads in bluegrass. It's like a whole genre of tunes. Knoxville Girl, Banks of the Ohio. If you ever look them up, they're just descriptions of horrible murders. And they go back to the British Isles. They're traditional folk songs, basically. But they're, you know, I think about the last line of Banks of the Ohio is, "I killed the only girl I love because she would not marry me." And I think there's a lot of theology in there about the human condition. Now, you might say, well, that's a horribly violent song, you shouldn't sing it. But I think there's you know, that idea of I do what I don't want to do, I don't know why I do what I do. There's some heavy theology in that one line that is not there in a lot of the gospel tunes. So I think it's hard.
Yeah. Very nuanced. Great question. Yeah.
I just want to say there is something called edgy Christian fiction, but even in Christian fiction, we are covering top tough topics like sex trafficking. One of my editors wrote a book that some of you read, Suburban Dangers, which was about sex trafficking. There's no actual sex on the page, but it covers sex trafficking very well. And that's how I learned that TAMI is opened in the suburbs at a mall, what could be going on. And we tackle abuse in marriage, physical abuse, emotional abuse, what happens with unplanned pregnancies. So that is covered in Christian fiction. We just maybe don't get into the nitty-gritty as much as you would maybe in mainstream, because we can get a thought across without really giving all these sordid details. So in the first book that I got published, it was a takeoff of a Bible story. I had been in general market land. I had been hanging out with romance writers, and my publisher, my Christian publisher, actually censored me on some scenes. And we worked to maybe find a middle ground, but because I had been in that arena for so long, she's like, you can get this point across without getting the reader too deep into that hole. And so we want to elicit emotion, but we can do that without throwing a whole bunch of garbage in there.
Yeah.
I really don't have too much to say about the negativity of visual arts. I just remember in college, people talking about, having to draw nudity and things like that, and that never appealed to me. There were a lot of abstract type of art that did not appeal to me, so I can't really address that. I was more into just the creation of God and looking at His splendor and appreciating that part.
It's interesting because as I was preparing this, I have a book with all the paintings at the Louvre and other books with paintings, and so some of these I snapped out of, just took a picture out of that book, and I came across Rembrandt's picture of Bathsheba as she's in the garden, and I couldn't put it up here. And it's interesting that back in that day, what was that, 400 years ago or whatever, they were very comfortable with painting nudity, many of them. It's good point. We've got just like 2 more minutes. Is there a last question, Mark?
Maybe we use this term Christian art.
Yeah.
Which is always kind of bothered me.
Yeah.
Why do we call something Christian art versus just art? Christians who do art versus some kind of art that's designed to be, Christian. I mean, some of the other things that have come up from the questions like Steve asked, there's powerful, disturbing things in life that we can explore through art. You see that in film, you see that in literature. I mean, you think of Flannery, I don't know if you've ever read Flannery O'Connor. She'll mess with you seriously. She was a Catholic writer, but she would explore really disturbing themes. Kind of like you mentioned with that song, there are themes that make you think and reflect in ways that you won't if everything's kind of sanitized, I guess. And that there's a certain kind of Christian sanitization. I mean, there's probably inappropriate art and obscene art, but there's also art that is trying to communicate and make you reflect on and have a different kind of experience. But it might mean you're going to encounter some things that you personally wouldn't do or you personally wouldn't endorse. And maybe you can just comment on this distinction between art, Christians doing art, and Christian art.
All right, the distinction between Christian art, is there really such a thing, or is it just artists who are Christians? Comments?
Well, I completely agree. I think there's no such thing as Christian art. There's art. If I'm a Christian and I believe Christianity is true, that's the best way to do art. That's the best way to be human. And so I think Christian art is a useful for organizing your CDs. It's a category. So the real question is what's appropriate in the context. So for Sunday morning worship, we want music that is explicit and directly about God and our life as Christians. That's what's appropriate for that setting. It's not more Christian. It's appropriate. I mean, that's a start. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a great.
I'll agree with John on that. And also, I think about it's the process of the art. As a Christian artist, it's how you view things. I just think about when I do a painting, or I should back up and say, when I look at God's creation, I see details that I have not seen before unless I did some painting. So as a painter, you get to appreciate just details that you might not have seen before. Whether it's in the sky of a sunset, you see, there's, the shapes and colors and sizes that you had not really seen before. So a lot of it is just appreciation for what God has given us.
Yeah, excellent. Hey, we're out of time. I know you got to pick up kids. Join us again next week. Thank you for coming, and let's give our panelists a hand.